Hey guys, this is Dang16. Welcome back to the MTT Principles series. This is going to be the last presentation and discussion. I'm going to do another episode or two afterwards, but it's just going to be some playing and thought process while I'm playing. That's kind of what I've got, the consensus from you guys and PMs and on the threads. That's kind of something everybody wants to see to wrap it up. So yeah, for this last episode today, we've, in our progression of MTT, we've gone from the bubble to in the money. Now we're starting to approach the final table. So we're going to first discuss the final table bubble, as well as a couple, how there might be some pay jumps that affect depending on the tournament, but it's usually not the case. More or less discussing the actual final table bubble and then the final table. So yeah, let's get started with approaching the final table. Alright, so as we're coming up to the final table, we want to be playing our absolute best poker. We're going to be in the money at this point. Really want to have our focus out there. Every decision's starting to become more and more important. One mistake might knock you out of the tournament, and one good play, good read, good something, might be the catapult that you need, to get a win in an MTT. At the final table. Everything that we've learned so far throughout the series continues to come into play. The bubble lesson, of course, is very important as we're approaching the final table. The final table bubble is just an even bigger, greater bubble, and just as important or more so. So yeah, let's go over the considerations that we have when developing our strategy or style. This is those same considerations we've looked at different stages throughout the tournament, but these are going to continue to be the most important things. So obviously going to continue to focus on them. Now that we're really talking about the final table bubble here between 10 and maybe 40-ish players, depending on the tournament and how many are there. So yeah, all of what we're discussing here is pretty much that final table bubble. Stacks, position, and image, something we've discussed at length throughout this series, especially in the last couple. I'm not going to beat a dead horse. Everything that we've taken into account is still, of course, important. Or everything we've discussed, of course, needs to be taken into account, all that. Image just continues to be more and more important. Now, as you've played more with some of the players, or you've just played with them for quite a while at this stage, now hopefully we have definitely going to have some mental notes, of course, and hopefully some written notes based on the players, as well as a good sample of hands. For those using a HUD, more reliable, probably a little bit more reliable number of hands. One thing to keep in mind with the HUD, people play differently at different stages of the tournament. If someone only has, the first couple levels, versus me, I'm probably going to come off as quite a nit, whereas not necessarily nit, but just a tight, aggressive player. Whereas someone who's only played deep in a tournament with me might have me quite a bit more aggressive. So the HUD, of course, is never the end-all be-all. We want to use a mix of written notes, mental notes, game flow, HUD. This is a game of imperfect information. We're trying to find any information that we possibly can, and use it, of course. Always be cognizant of your image, that of the players at your table, and any other table that you're watching. Of course, if we're watching the other table, some people are going to be watching us as well. So if we've made some crazy 5-bet on the bubble and shown down like 6-4 suited or something, if you elected to do that, you got to know that other people likely saw that. So always be cognizant. Something I've said a ton throughout the series. Table dynamic, of course, stays important, um, especially as we start to get shorthanded or playing between 5 and 8 players after, or even three. Maybe in a six max tournament. In a perfect world, of course, we're still gonna want to be in a spot with aggressive players and the big stacks on our right, and the tight players and the small stack players on our left. Of course, that's a perfect world. When we're playing 3 to 5, 6, 7 handed, if we have one really, really weak player or one person that we're targeting, the table dynamic might allow us to do that from under the gun or, cut off, hijack. Just, bottom line, like I said, still matters. It's still important. Next up, game flow. Um, of course, this is extremely important, but also what's going on at the other tables. From the beginning of an MTT until there's 45 or maybe 27 players left, or even less, depending on the tourney, I don't really care what's going on at the other tables. I can only control my situation at any given time and what's going on at my table. So I'm not going to waste my time and energy worrying about what the average stack is or the other tables in the field. Stop looking at the lobby. It doesn't matter what the average is. Play your stack, play your situation. But when we get down to a couple tables, and if we have the monitor space and the ability to stay focused on our table as well as others, you can keep an eye on the other table or tables, so we can get an idea of the stacks, positions, images, table dynamic, and how all those tie together into the game flow, and hopefully any information that we can pick up will help make a decision later on or help us define our style or strategy versus players until the final table or even heads up. As far as game flow goes, if one table is playing really, really aggressive with a lot of action and throwing chips around, the players at your table might see that and in turn tighten up, because they know they have a great chance in making the final table. That they want to give the aggressive, crazy players on the other table an opportunity to bust each other. If that's the case and you recognize it, this is the time to pick up the aggression and start to trying to pick up some chips here. Again, and then if you're on a really tough table with marginal stacks, and there's some weak weak players left, or you feel that the bubble's gonna pop early, you might not make as a really high variance play on the bubble, because you're confident you're going to be able to find a better spot later on when the bubble does break, or just by being tight and waiting for a big hand. All of this discussion, bottom line, just ties into being aware of your surroundings and always being ready, willing, and able to adapt to them. Something that, everybody wants one answer. They want to hear how to do something perfectly, etc. And in a game like this, it's just not possible. Always just being able to adapt and try to do what's best to the situation. That's all you can hope for. That and a little bit of luck, of course. As we talked about last week, the bubble and, of course, the final table bubble can be quite different depending on the field size. If you're talking about a 90-man tournament, the money bubble is the final table bubble and vice versa. So, we're just playing one real bubble, and then it's the final table right there. Whereas, like a humongous field micro tournament, like on Stars, like a 10,000-man tournament, it might feel like the final table bubble starts with 45 left, or at least we start to see a change in the play of your table on the other tables as the real money starts to approach. a 10,000 man tournament also might play crazy until the end. You never know. Regardless of the field size, we need to base our strategy on all the considerations we've discussed. Try to take everything into account as much as possible. Lastly, buy-in, still important. Pretty much exact same discussions as last week. The bigger the buy-in, usually the more players that are going to be there, but also there might be the one or two really scared players. Just depend on who's around. Just a quick little bit of insight or comparison. If there's 10 really good professionals, Phil Ivey and the like, left in the main World Series of Poker main event, the action might continue to just be crazy with 10 left and everybody playing for the win and trying to outplay each other. Whereas in the smallest field online or the smallest tournament ever, if there's 10 players left with no scores, and this might be infinitely tighter than that pro main event. So the buy-in, obviously matters, and more often than not is going to have an effect. But again, it's just the situation and the players that needs to be more important. So, quick little summation here on the discussion. As we approach the final table and the final table bubble, I will continue to try to be as aggressive as possible. I've been saying that for a few episodes now. As aggressive as possible is the goal. Just make sure that the considerations and everything allow it. Sometimes you just can't do and also you keep in mind sometimes you just can't do as much as you'd really like. Your stack position, opponents, game flow, table dynamic, etc., blah blah blah, all of that may not allow you to be as aggressive as you like to be or as you normally are. So don't try to force anything. Let it come to you. Sometimes you just have to wait for that big hand or something to reshove. Going out of your way to play 9-3 offsuit, out of position with a marginal hand and a marginal spot is just dumb. It's just not plus EV. So, as far as looking at hands go, I could show you infinite hands of me just opening, 3-betting, reshoving, open shoving on final table bubbles, and I'm just not going to do that. As we've looked at quite a few hands so far throughout the series and the bubble hands in episode 6, it's just going to be more of the same with, maybe with 5 to 8 players. Just as I would on a money bubble. If I feel like I've got a lot of fold equity with a lighter hand and 22 blinds, I'm going to reshove it. I don't have to show you guys all that. But what I am going to do before we go to the final table discussion is just talk about my ranges a bit here on the final table bubble. So you can take that into it, or not really talk about my ranges, just a little bit of strategy. So you can take that into account along with everything else we've seen in the series. Also what you've seen in your game, what you've seen watching poker, reading poker, all of that to help develop your style and strategy. Honestly, if I have a lot of chips on the final table bubble, it's not rare for me to open any 2 cards from any position. This probably isn't going to happen with 40 left in the tournament. Luckily, actually, this weekend on Sunday, I had a nice score in one of the huge field, in the big field, $55 on stars, and had that stack on the bubble quite a bit, where I was able to be as aggressive as possible. And something like 9-4 offsuit from under the gun, something I would never ever play. Well, I had the stack and the table to do it. So, my range might be as big as any 2 cards. 3-betting as well. Maybe not any 2 cards depending on the player that opens, but massive 3-bet range when I have the chips. Open shoving, reshoving, anything, anywhere that I perceive fold equity and nittiness, or all the above. I'm just going to do it and be as aggressive as possible. Marginal stack. It's, just as we've talked about at any stage of the tournament, I'm not going to pass up good plus EV spots. And so with that marginal stack, it's going to be reshoves, open shoving. On the bubble, I might make some a little bit bigger shoves. I have actually a $20 180 man comes to mind that I played recently. I was stuck with 17 to 24-ish blinds on the final table bubble, from like 14 all the way down to 9. And it was a pretty aggressive table, but I was getting some marginal hands. So I remember open shoving ace-9 suited with 22 blinds from the cutoff, and it was just based on the players behind me and how it was going. I knew I had big fold equity, and I knew that my hand was very much ahead of random cards, and they had a tight calling range, but I just didn't want to open and get reshoved on. So, there's stuff that we've talked about at all stages hopefully comes into play, and sorry, trying to gather my thoughts here real quick. With the tight table, opening and reshoving as light as possible. Most of this is similar to my strategy at all stages of the MTT, but even more so now, as the average final table bubble, of course, plays tight. Nobody wants to get 10th. Getting 10th sucks, but also if you can use this situation, or if you get a couple 10ths, 11ths, and 12s, as well as some firsts, the firsts will feel pretty good. So yeah, let's move on to the actual final table. Alright, here we are at the final table. It's the holy grail of the MTT world. That's where, that's your goal when you start any tournament. And now that we're here, it's time to start and hopefully, make some real money. Whether it's the November 9, the Sunday Million, or 100-man $1 freeze out, final table is the goal. So now we're here. It's time to use everything that we've learned throughout the series, throughout this MTT, and just throughout your poker career in general. Hopefully, when you do make a big final table or even a small one, hopefully something that you've learned recently or pretty much at any point during your career, hopefully that comes together and you can use it. Yeah, use it and hopefully attack the final table well, and with some good play and some good luck, get a big win. People ask me what my strategy is for final tables a lot, and I tend to answer that question the exact same way that I answer when they ask me what my strategy is for just an MTT in general. It depends. Bottom line, it always depends. Depends all of the things we've discussed throughout the series, specifically those considerations up on the PowerPoint slide. We've talked about these a lot. There's also a couple of others here, or some others that we might have used at other stages of the series. But I just can't define an exact strategy. It always depends. If I did have to give a strategy that I tend to use more often than not, it's similar to my MTT strategy as a whole. Kind of a little tight at the beginning, and adapt from there. It's going to be a little bit different to, obviously, the beginning stages of an MTT, as there's going to be quite a few different dynamics. But I like to start tight, see where we're going, really try to put it all together, and then make my strategy after that. But if I have 9 big blinds to start the final table, I'm absolutely not going to pass up any plus EV shove spot. But if I'm sitting on that marginal stack in a marginal position, or just really in the middle, I might sit back for an orbit or so and see what's going on at the table. Bottom line, being able to recognize your situation and table and adapt. every week I've said it's more and more important, and at this point it's just more important than ever, of course. All right, so yeah, let's talk about our considerations again and how they're going to affect our play and strategy at the final table. I really hope you guys aren't getting sick of these considerations. I keep trying to, I start to think of, doing something else but for these videos, but it just seems to be the things that I continue to go back to. So, they're obviously important. So, SPNI, stacks, positions, and images. Stay important depending on the turning and the structure, of course. Stacks might be very wide at a final table. You might have something like, you might have a stack of 5 BBs while the chip leader might have like 300 blinds randomly. Or, it might be a turbo where the stack disparity is between like 3 big blinds and 25. So, depending on the structure and the tournament, stacks can have a big impact on your on your strategy, on your play. If it's one of those turbos where you're one of 5 guys around 20 blinds, and you probably going to be more inclined to kind of be a bit tighter at the beginning and get an idea of what's going on. Or you might have a great idea of who's doing what or notes and be ready to attack them from the get-go. Always depends. Any given MTT might produce the craziest disparity in stack sizes ever. It's all good. At this point, you should have a pretty good idea of what you can and can't do with and versus different stack sizes. We've been talking about it throughout the entire series. That's going to stay very similar, especially full ring. Of course, we're going to want to exploit any information we've gained to this point, but I'm not going to shove 7-3 offsuit under the gun with 15 blinds, or that's kind of a dumb example, but I'm just not going to do anything crazy outside of my read, stacks, all the above, just because we're at a final table. Position, of course, stays important. I mean, always is, duh. And the nice part about final tables is your position is set, for the rest of the tourney. Of course, the table dynamic, game flow, stack sizes might change, but you've got a pretty good idea of where you are from the beginning. Image, of course, stays important, and the changes are similar to those we've seen on the money bubble, in the money, final table bubble, etc. A person who's extremely nitty on the final table bubble might go crazy now at the final table just because they're happy to be there and anything else is a bonus. Maybe their life goal was to make the 10 rebuy final table, and they've made it, and at that point anything else is a bonus. On the other hand of the spectrum, a very good player who understands MTTs, a big winner, may have just been completely crushing the final table bubble with aggressive opens, 3-bets, 4-bet shoves, all that. He might tighten up at the final table, in an attempt to reestablish a tighter image, or maybe he just doesn't have the seat or the table, or all that. So, things change. Again, my favorite thing to say the last few weeks, and especially this, was be aware, ready to adapt. Be aware, know what's going on. Next up on our considerations list, table dynamic. Very important at the final table. Really like to focus on the type of player here. Stack sizes is still important, but I'm happier to have a certain type of player on my left or right more than a stack often than not. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. A big part of that is the chips are going to be flying around. They're going to move from seat to seat, and I think it's easier for me to attack a nitty or an aggressive player, or tag him as that. So if it's amazing to have super nits on your left, at any point of the table. It allows you to steal blinds, be aggressive blind versus blind, do things in position. On the other side, having a super crazy nut job on your left can be extremely frustrating as well, and sometimes It just really dictates what you can and can't do. Um, you know, Table dynamic of the stacks is still very important as well. But like I said, chips get thrown around. A guy with 8 blinds might have 60 in an orbit or two. It's very possible. So you still want to pound the short stacks on your left and the right, just constantly changing. Of course, good players will adapt their tight or loose play depending on the situation, but a lot of this series is really focused on the lower to mid stakes, and you're just not going to see people as good at adapting. When you get a good table dynamic, especially at a final table, you absolutely have to use it. Recognize who's tight, who lets you steal, who plays back, who's a calling station, etc. All of those things that we have discussed throughout the series come into play, and hopefully with the tools that you've learned, you can exploit these situations and win the final tables that we do get to. Game flow. Sometimes the table just plays weird. Unfortunately, sometimes regardless of stacks, positions, images, table dynamic, a tournament might just go nut job overnight or crazy tight. Sometimes it just happens. Maybe all those notes, reads, and considerations kind of have to go out the window temporarily due to what's going on at a final table, and I could definitely see that happen at the micros. But you need to still keep those in the back of your mind, and ready to pounce on them if the table does kind of go back to normal. But if it's going nuts, use it to your advantage. Sorry, I'm trying to read off my notes. Yeah, table goes really tight. Don't be afraid to raise something that's out of your normal range in a different position, or don't be afraid to make a tight fold if the table goes super tight. Someone might be shoving on you really weirdly, or I mean not weirdly, but in a spot where you just know that you're not beat, even if it's like ace king or something. Don't be afraid to make that good fold when the table's right. And again, if the table goes crazy and you just aren't getting cards, and maybe you're normally an aggressive player, someone who likes to play a lot of pots, do not go out of your way to make things happen at a table. Sometimes you just have to wait, and the cards dictate what you can do. These, again, stuff that should be taken into account at all stages of MTTs, but absolutely intensified at the final table. A lot of the things I say, like, oh yeah, take into account something we've learned before, all that, some of it just comes with experience as well, and really recognizing game flow. You might be better at it at certain stages than others. Just keep working on it. Keep playing. Field size and buy-in. Going to lump these two together, kind of how I have a lot of times throughout this series. Buy-ins at this point is going to be more important than the field size. Once you're at the final table, it kind of doesn't matter. If there's that guy that folded his life away to the 10 rebuy final table, and now that was his life goal. At this point, he's probably not going to knit up to get 6th place. 9th to 5th probably doesn't mean a whole lot of difference to him. Now, if the buy-in is high and the jumps are steep, then yes, absolutely, this can have a huge effect on the play at the table and what you're going to do. Kind of just be aware. Hopefully, you should know this a bit. Who's still in it? Who's around? And if you find yourself at a bigger final table, something bigger than you're used to, or your first big one, and you're nervous, just find ways to calm yourself down. Deep breaths, take a quick walk in your office, in your room, in between hands. Really don't look at the lobby. Who cares about the payouts right now? It doesn't matter what the payouts are right now. Just worry about your game, and what you can do right now. That was one of the only good things I remember ever seeing from a World Series episode on TV. I remember Howard Lederer saying, I only focus on my exact situation for my exact moment, my exact table right now. And that's something that really helped me. I used to have a problem with, looking at the lobby, looking at the average. who cares? All you can play is your situation at that point right there. Play the structure, not the lobby. Play your game, not the lobby. I think it can really come into play when you're deep in a tourney that you know is big for you, or if you're just new and you're excited. It's good to be excited, but it's also really good to just focus on the situation that you can make right there. So, yeah, hopefully that helps. Next up, payout structures. They vary greatly. Some can be super flat, some steep. Bottom line, tournaments reward the top three and specifically the winner. You absolutely need to be playing to win. That's it. Yes, it's nice to play up on the pay scale, of course, but making a decision based on your hope to move up from seventh to fourth place money, that shouldn't happen. It's just really not how you should be playing in MTTs. And yeah, it's like, even if there's a couple really short stack, 3 or 4 of them even at a final table, nothing is guaranteed in poker ever. Just because there are a few shorter stacks doesn't mean they can't double up a few times and they be the chip leaders before you know it. So, again, don't make any decisions based on the lobby. That's the payout structure, just like looking at the average or how many left. All right, let's talk, little discussion about deal making with a bit of an ICM. Really want to preface that I am by no means an expert on ICM. I didn't really even know what it was until, I don't know, kind of like 2000, probably like 2008, 2009. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to force that down your throat much. I will do a little bit about it, but yeah, check it out on your own or ask some questions in the forums. Deal making comes into play at a lot of final tables, and I can be a huge proponent or opponent of a deal. If it's a great deal, absolutely, take it. But there's times where people jump on chip count and ICM chops. Probably too quickly. Just, they might be the guy that's a little too afraid to get third or fourth. It's all good, guys. I was guilty of that myself. I've made a couple deals early on that was probably not in my best interest. So, that being said, if it's a good one and all the considerations are taken into account, do it. You need to take into account the considerations we've talked about the whole time: stacks, table flow, dynamics, opponents, buy-in, all that stuff in order to make the decision good. I played heads up. I had a heads up match versus a very, very bad player who we started heads up, and unfortunately, he beat me up pretty good, and at one point had a 6-1 chip lead, and I clicked the full tilt deal button and was able to talk this guy into an even chop. This is one of those situations where I felt my edge was huge, but I was down to like 11 blinds and I was one hand away. So absolutely, I'm going to try to make this deal. But in the beginning we were heads up, and I feel like my edge was huge, and he asked for a deal, and I said no, of course. Based on the considerations of the table. So bottom line, there are some good deals that are good, or there's some good deals that I'll take and some that I won't. It's all going to depend on the considerations of the MTT, who I'm playing, how am I playing, how am I running. Game flow, all the above need to do that. Not just the ICM or the chip count or any of that. So yeah, ICM, important concept, final tables, sit and goes, everything. Again, I am by no means an expert, but it's a buzzword that in poker that thrown around a lot and probably used incorrectly or in the wrong context as well. By definition, ICM is independent chip modeling. It's an acronym for that. and it represents the amount of equity that you have in an MTT or sit and go, based on your remaining stack. If we're three-handed in an MTT with two players with the exact same stack size, we all have 100K exactly even. Well, then our equity is exactly 1/3 of the remaining prize pool. So if we're in this spot in the remaining prize pool 6K, then our ICM equity is exactly 2K. So, if we were going purely by ICM, we would be getting this 2K. Now, this assumes that all three players in this tournament have the exact same skill set, and exact same reads, exact same information, exact same software, exact same internet even, It's not. That's obviously not always the case, and this is, of course, a very basic example of it. But it can be a gauge. If you all have the exact same stacks and 2K ICM equity, but you feel like you have a 10% edge, maybe that's the spot where you say, okay, I'll take a deal for 2,200 if you guys take 1,900 apiece, something like that. I would just suggest doing a little bit more reading online in the forums. I actually just read quite a few articles myself in the last week or so, and specifically today when trying to knock down some stuff on ICM. One thing that I didn't put a hand. I'm only going to show a couple of hands today, by the way. I'll explain that later. But there's where ICM can come into play. Last night I was watching a student and he was playing very, very well. Had 3 million chips of about 4.5 million chips in play, three-handed of a final table, and he was doing a really good job of taking chips away from the other two. They both had roughly the exact same stack size, while we were huge. We being my student, and he just did a really great job of three betting and taking chips away from the other two, thus lowering their ICM, improving his, and making it a lot easier to hopefully win the tournament. So this final table stuff that we just talked about, all the considerations, kind of my quote unquote default strategy. Go from a full ring final table all the way down to heads up. Now let's just take a second to look at, just talk about shorthanded and heads up play real quick. Again, this I'm only showing. I'll talk about the hands for today too. I'm not showing a ton of hands. A couple reasons for that. One, I don't have a ton of final tables hands in my database. I'm pretty new to Hold'em Manager, pretty new to using any technology at all. So yeah, it's hard to find really a ton of really good stuff, really good hands for me right now. And again, most of this stuff we've started to go over. The only difference is now, busting might have some different payout implications and all that. So, a lot of this is just discussion, and I hope that mixed with the hands we've put together and looked at in previous episodes, you'll have an example to go back to. So, as the final table progresses, we're starting to lose players. The dynamics are going to continue to change. Please keep in mind all of the considerations that we've discussed in the last slide, as well as these and more. This can be an amazing time to take advantage of the impending, top three or heads up bubble. This can be an inflection point. It can happen at any point at the final table. It might be just one person busting, or the table might stay crazy until four-handed. Just want to talk about a couple things here that will affect your strategy and play at this stage. So we lose players, hand values change, of course. Ace-Jack under the gun begins to look a lot sexier than it did full ring at this final table. So does top pair marginal kicker, second pair, third pair, eights on 2 over cardboard. you just got to get used to this. You got to get used to playing a little bit more shorthanded, and I very much suggest mixing in 6 max and even 4 max, or even heads up tournaments in your schedule to get used to it. You know, other than that, final table experience just comes with it, with time, with playing time. Watching final tables helps. That's one thing though as well. I have so many guys that I coach say, "Well, I saw X or a so and so 100 rebuy rig do this at the 100 rebuy final table." Well, is that what you're playing? Is that your opponents? All that. So I think it's great to watch these tournaments, but watch, if you're playing a $10 average buy-in, watch the daily 40K final table. Watch the 3 rebate final table. Watch, watch other things. That's probably a better use of your time as far as learning. But yeah, other than that, it just is going to come with experience and play. Play as much as possible. Shorthanded, table dynamics constantly going to be changing. A mega nit on your left might bust, and now we have an aggressive player in the big blind while we're in the small blind. Now we can't raise any 2 cards every small blind. Gonna have to mix it up and adapt. Also, maybe a very aggressive player loses a big pot and is also a good player and knows how to adapt. If he can't be as aggressive as he liked to be at the considering the stacks, well, now it's time to adapt to that. Use the skills and everything else that we've learned to this point. Action. I just called it constant action here. When we get 6-handed and other, you have to be involved, especially at the final table. The blinds are getting bigger and bigger. The average stack is probably not, massive or anything like that. So if you're a tight player, this might be tough to get used to, and it might also be hard to get used to. Well, hopefully the things that you've learned in this series will help. And yeah, start playing some 4 and 6 max, heads up tournaments more if that's what you think you need, by all means. Even if it's watching some shorthanded cash tables, it might not, or videos about shorthanded cash. It might not be perfect, but I think anything can help. Okay, heads up. Everything we've discussed throughout this entire series comes into play. Specifically today, really want to focus on. Oh, sorry, just switch the thing. Really want to focus on position. Heads up. We get the opportunity to play every other hand in position, and I'm going to take that opportunity. Honestly, my heads up range, blind versus blind, or heads up from the button, oftentimes is any 2 cards, often like 80%, and then if it's a guy that's 3-betting every other time, maybe it gets knocked down a little bit. Hard to give you an exact range. It's kind of similar to giving you exact hands at the final table. I just don't think that's possible. It's just so much about adaptation, experience, learning, thinking, all that. So yeah, me showing you hands of raising 9-3 offsuit from the button, heads up, dumb, doesn't make sense. So yeah, lastly, as far as heads up goes, you're really need to be read dependent, and hopefully your focus and reads will help bear fruit at this point. You might be willing to get any pair in post flop versus some opponents. Some you may not. It's just all going to depend on your reads, etc. So yeah, kind of wrap this up today. This is the final presentation of the series. Hope it all ties together. Hopefully it's not super, I don't think it's super confusing. I think I tried to keep it as simple as possible. And I also got some very good questions and things like that. Yeah, what I think, actually I'll just talk about that at the very end after the hands. So let's take a look at a couple hands. more. I think one or two might be final table bubble and one or two final table, and they're just going over a couple more concepts that I've gotten questions about. So yeah, let's take a look. All right, guys. So for hands to go over today, it's more or less just going to be some spots that I was asked questions about prior, mainly via PM, about things that were going to be on the lost on the final table and the bubble final table bubble um, video. And yeah, I just had a couple hands here. Again, I don't have a huge database of hands um, right now, and I was hoping to do more of these hands based on questions I get. So I also haven't yet decided. I'm going to in the next couple days whether or not I'm just going to do a couple live videos to end this series or just begin a whole new series to complement this with live play. Haven't decided yet. Haven't talked with the bosses yet either, and I need to do that as well. So, point of that little spiel: when I do some live stuff, I would like to show my later game thought process and just how I go about that particular MTT, because so much of what I've taught you throughout this series was based on changing it, being able to adapt, seeing what everyone's doing at the table. So, we will do that eventually. All right. So this was just a question about 3-betting out of position. When do I do it and why? This was a smaller tournament. Final table bubble. I think there's like 17 left in a 6 max. Just talking about c-betting and being out of position and just some sizing stuff. Here, 6 max. And I make a smaller 3-bet out of position. Usually closer to about 2 3/4, but I made it a little bit smaller here based on the player. That's what I wanted to emphasize. Guy had been folding to a lot of 3-bets in this particular tourney, and I thought size wasn't going to be a huge factor. Didn't think I was going to get flatted much. Unfortunately, I did, and I would go on to alter my 3-bet sizing later. But just some exercise about c-betting. I'll go anywhere from about 12,000 there to a little bit bigger, 18, 19, maybe even 20,000, depending on the player, if that is my intent to c-bet. Little bit smaller sizing, even if I make it like 13 here to 15, if I get played back at, I can fold. It's not something we want to do, put that much of our stack in very often. But based on the situation and how it was being played, I thought I was going to get him off at pre, and I definitely thought I could get him off it on the flop. And luckily, I was able to. So yeah, pretty much just answering the questions of out of position. People wanted to see some sizing in a hand and just kind of discuss it. If I had like the ace of hearts in my hand, or maybe that was the two of clubs, and it was a rainbow board, I might have put a little bit, might have put in a little bit of a smaller bet size. So yeah, hopefully that one answers the questions I got. All right, next spot. Here's just a final table versus a very aggressive opponent who also hadn't been doing this to me much, or actually had 3-bet me quite a bit in both positions. I'm sorry, I got the hands confused. There's also, I just knew that the player was going to try to take advantage of the fact that the small blind and under the gun, the numbers player here, both had quite a bit shorter stacks than me. That I could easily be waiting for these 16, 17, 18, 19 blind stacks of bust. And I also just saw this as a good opportunity to pick up some chips. Because what sorry, what I just said. Hopefully I didn't confuse anybody too much. So yeah, just he was trying to use the smaller stacks against me because he could bust me. I just perceived that as a bit of weakness. Knew I had a lot of fold equity. Um, Not enough, I guess. Got called by King Queen King Queen. But ran out a winner there. Fortunately for me, I or fortunately for me, the hand held up. But I think he can 3-bet me and with quite a bit less there, and I think that's the absolute bottom of his calling range. Something like King Jack, I'd be surprised if he does call me off there. I was really surprised by this hand as it was. So kind of just situation. I showed a pocket eights hand on the bubble of a tournament early on in the series where I was just willing to go with it. That was at middle stages, and it was just the same type of scenario. Pretty aggressive player. Of course, this is for quite a bit different reasons. This was for quite a bit more money. So, yeah. Hopefully that answered the question that I received. One more hand for us today. Someone got a question about doing any limp re-raising ever, and I don't do it very often. I usually just don't have the read on the player, or I might be multi-tabling and I just don't think it's a good spot for it, or something along those lines. But I thought it was a good one. I tried limping on him a few hands before, just kind of see what he would do. Hadn't worked yet, and he raised me. So I elected to limp here with, what do I have here? About 27 blinds. Or do I have that many? Sorry. 28,000. No, about 22 and a half, I think, pretty sure. And limp shove over his raise and get a fold. So yeah, that's a spot that I really only do it when I have a pretty good read on players. I'd also seen him raise a lot from other spots and 3-bet, and knew he was definitely capable of pounding a limp, and then that I would also have fold equity as well post flop. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question. All right, so kind of just to end today, and essentially the presentation part of the series. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of it. Talked about a lot of different concepts from the beginning to the end. And I hope this is stuff that you can repeat, easily remember, things like that. I know a lot of it was about, adapting to the situation, the tables, and I hope I gave you the things to look for. Always be posting hands in the forums, trying to be active on there. Hopefully after Christmas time it'll be a little bit easier to be able to do that daily. But yeah, ask questions. Let me know what you want to see in future videos. Like I said, I'm either going to do a couple live sessions to add to the end of this series, or maybe just go into another 8-part series, and I don't know, it depends on on what the boss men want, stuff like that. So I'm going to take a look. So hope you enjoyed the series, the presentation part so far, and hopefully look forward to some live stuff. This is Dang16 for Deuces Cracked. Have a good one.